brothers and friends in Christ, wherever you are. Today, I would like to point out to you two paradoxes that I discover in the Gospel and also in the first reading. A paradox is like two things that really contradicts one another. It's like, how can this be true at the same time, right? So the first one is when Jesus say, right, anyone who tries to preserve his life will lose it, he or her life, and anyone who loses it will keep it safe. That's a paradox. If you try and keep your life, you lose it. If you don't try and keep your life, you will save it. That's one. And then this paradox that St. Paul says about the new commandment, but it's not a new commandment. It's an old time commandment. And what is that commandment? He said, to love one another. And he said, that's an old commandment. Didn't he remember when Jesus said, this is my new commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. So must you love one another. Right? He said this is a new commandment. But Paul said it's not a new commandment. It's been there for the old times. In some way, Paul is correct, because when Jesus was asked, what is the most important commandment in the whole of Torah, the whole of Jewish law? And he quoted two commandments from there, right? To love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your soul, and to love one another, to love others as yourself. So in some way, Jesus is saying that Paul is right. This is a commandment that has been there for the longest time. It's an old commandment. And yet Jesus is saying, this is a new commandment when he said, love one another as I have loved you. So the standard is no longer, you say, love one another, love others as you love yourself. It's not your standard of loving anymore, but it's Jesus' standard of loving, right? It's different, right? Our standard of love, okay, is maybe my standard of love is if I feel good about you, then that's love. If you make me feel good, then that's love, and I'll love you back. Huh? Do something good to me and I'll love you back. Right? That might be my standard. Huh? Might be two different people. As long as you're happy, I'm happy. We love one another. Okay? That could be my standard. But Jesus' standard is way different. Right? His standard is that. Right? There's nothing easy about loving others as far as Jesus is concerned. Is it easy or difficult to love someone dying on the cross? Difficult. It reminds me of Pope, late Saint Pope John Paul II. And he wrote this beautiful book which I recommend you to read. It's called Love and Responsibility. Love and Responsibility. Right? Far from, so he's writing this for young people especially, right? Love love is a responsibility. Love is not merely a feeling, a good feeling, right? Now these days, people say, I love you. It's when you feel some kind of warmth towards the next person, the person that you say, I love you, right? That's what's called love. Love is a feeling of love, right? But if love remains just a feeling of what others make you feel good or somewhat we call loving towards the other person, then that's far from Jesus' standard of love, right? Love, if he just loved others, including the Pharisees who condemned him to death, or the soldiers who, torture him and get him to carry all the cross, I don't think that made him feel good at that time. It's a lot of pain, right? And yet, what John Paul is saying, love and responsibility, that word responsibility comes from the word, what is the root word? We've been talking about root word in English. What is the root word? Response, and then you add all these suffixes. Civility. So the root word is response. What is response? Response, yes, is a reply. Jawaban. If you reply, that means you received something first, right? We received something first, and then you respond. You reply. But so response is a reply, but we understand responsibility as tanggung jawab. So it's my responsibility. It means I'm in charge. I need to make sure that this is done well, right? The other understanding of responsibility is you respond, you reply out of something that you have received. And that's what we say to ourselves as missionaries of God's love. We are responding to the love of God that we first received. It's not we initiate the love, becoming missionaries of God's love. I am the beginning of God's love. No, right? We are merely responding to God's love, but it's a responsibility because we have received that kind of love that saves your soul, my soul, that saves us, redeemed us from sin. The fruit of sin is death, right? And now we come to this word that Jesus said, if you try and keep your life, then you will lose it. If you try not to lose it, or give it for the sake of others, then you will keep it. You will preserve your life. But that's the paradox that we are contemplating today, right? As Jesus didn't try to keep his life and he lost it on the cross, the Father raises him up and he keeps it. So what does that mean for us? So when we respond by loving one another, not by our own standard, but as Jesus has loved us, losing his life on the cross, what kind of attitude that we need to keep in order that we can love one another, lose our lives for the sake of attitude is nothing but patience. Yes, of course, that's love, right? The attitude is an attitude of what? One word. Do you know? That's the key. If you love, it's in that commandment too. You know, Jesus quoted 2 commandments, 2 most important commandments. Right? Yes, faithfulness, it's there. Love, that's a bit abstract. Thank you very much, Lee. The attitude. What is the attitude, brothers? This is the most important thing in to follow Jesus, yes. But what's the attitude of following Jesus? That's getting there. You're following Jesus to the cross. So what do you need to do? What do you need to have in your heart? It starts with T. It's 5-letter word. Okay, I'm going to do this game of what we call that? Taboo game. Right? It's when you abandon yourself in the thank you, Juna. You've got it. Trust. Right? When you abandon yourself, as Jesus abandoned himself on the cross, doesn't really care much about what will happen to him. Right? He gives his life and he loves. He showed how to love one another. He trusts God, he trusts the Father, right? Until to the point when he felt even that abandonment. Father, Father, why have you abandoned me? Bapa, mengapa engkau meninggalkan aku? Right? He felt the abandonment. So when you love with responsibility, you don't feel like loving much. You don't even feel that you are loved by God. It's not about feeling, but it's about a response, a reply. It's about losing yourself. Right? It's about, we try and love one another, Father Isaac and I. It's only a little love, but it's something. We try and love Father Wesley. He goes to retreat. So we say we'll fast for him for 3 days, right? So that he will have a good, fruitful retreat. That's something, it's big for us too, but it doesn't make me feel good. Not, fasting, extra days of fasting, right? Other example, Father Paul in the Philippines, in responsibility with Corona, right? He abandoned himself to God's will and find out how many people did he need to feed, right? During the pandemic in the Philippines, because he worked in the slums where poor people live, right? In Payatas. So he felt that God wanted he and his team to feed 10,000 families, about 50,000 people every week. So didn't know where the money will come from, the risk of Corona and all that. He abandoned himself, didn't think about his life much, right? Provision came, all donations were enough to feed 50,000 or more people every week. Week in, week out, lockdown continues, continued from 1 month, 2 months, 3 months and all that. And eventually, what did he get? Corona. He himself contracted Corona, a number of his team. But when we saw him, boy, how much joy this man has. when he shared, "Well, I've got corona, but don't worry about me." He was so joyful. You can't believe it. I'm dead jealous of him, right? And he found that joy when you lose yourself for the sake of others, right? You will save your life. If you died with the corona, you died as a happy man. I'll proclaim you a saint. Santo Subito saved now, huh? Because he gave his life for others, just like Jesus gave his life for others. So brothers, these are real examples in our life. It's before our eyes. It's possible only by the love of God, the love that has paid the price for our death and sins. The love of Christ on the cross. So brothers, friends in Christ, let us love one another as Jesus has loved us. Let us trust God the Father as Jesus has trusted the Father on the cross. And may his name be glorified.